Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have such a wonderful and fun show for you this evening. Barry and Brian Schiff are here with us. Before we get started, just a few tips. As always, tonight's show will be recorded and available on SocialFlight's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in SocialFlight. One word, SocialFlight, and that'll get you what you need. In addition to that, with all of these events returning and pancake breakfasts and Young Eagles events and fly-ins, so many things, be sure to get the free SocialFlight mobile app or just go to socialflight.com and you can see either a map or a list of all of these events around the country happening and in your local area. It's a great way to shake off the pandemic and get back into flying, get out there, see some airplanes, meet some people, and have a mission in your flying. And by doing that, you also get a weekly email that has a list of everything happening just in your local area. We also have prizes. There are just tons and tons of things to do. So with that, I want to bring on Barry and Brian Schiff with 28,000 hours logged in more than 355 types of aircraft. He's a best-selling author and more awards than I have time to list. Barry Schiff is an aviation legend, and his son Brian isn't far behind. He's a captain for a major U.S. airline, an innovative educator in his own right. I'm going to bring both of them on now. I am absolutely thrilled to call both of them friends and welcome Barry and Brian Schiff. Oh my God, I guess you guys have the book.
I'm almost ready, hang on. Okay.
Hello. I figured it out, Brian.
Perfect.
How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you so much for taking time to join us here on the show. It is always a treat to have both of you, and I got tons of questions, so we just have to hop into this because we're not even going to have enough time. I want to start with, there was a shout out recently in AOPA. AOPA did this whole big thing on the 180-degree turn and all these things, and as soon as I heard Brian Schiff mentioned, and then I believe it was the justification as to why they could not do any 180-degree turns or something like that, I stood up. So what's going on with this?
Brian, you want me to do it?
No, go ahead.
There have been a lot of people now who are starting to teach or presume to be teaching, turning around shortly after takeoff in the event of an engine failure. But a lot of them are so abbreviated, they're not complete, and they don't really give you all the information you need to safely make that turn. It can't always be made safely, and you have to know that. The important thing about the turn, and there's so much more to it, is that you should never, ever, ever make a turn after takeoff following an engine failure unless it is actually more dangerous to go straight ahead.
So let me ask something about this, because this is interesting. I mean, when I learned how to fly, ages ago, I always thought that was just off the table. Like everything you read was, don't even try it.
It was the rule of the day.
Are you saying something's changed?
What I think is happening is that although the rule of the day is to go straight ahead, we tell everybody go straight ahead, and even though everybody knew you're not supposed to turn around, they were turning around and killing themselves anyway because it's instinctual. You want to go back where you came from, where it was safe. And so pilots are doing it anyway. So I think the FAA finally got on board and said, hey, they're doing it anyway. We need to have instructors teach how, if you're going to do it, and then when it's okay to do it. Because there is a time and a place that it's okay, and there's a time and a place you absolutely shouldn't do it. But by all means, if you have an airport with nothing but fields in front of you, and you lose an engine, go straight ahead, take one of those fields.
In most cases, you should go straight ahead, but there are times when you'd be better off turning, and you have to be able to recognize when those times exist.
Yeah, so and if any of the listeners are going to Oshkosh, I'll be talking about that with Richard McSpadden, about that video they put out, and we'll be doing that in the AOPA tent at Oshkosh if you make it there.
Oh God, I'll definitely be at that one. That's for sure. I mean, that seems like that's it. During critical times, that's one of the most important things is to know what you're going to do exactly in those moments when it happens. And it's interesting to me that instructors have started to teach people to turn around, but it sounds like they're not really getting the whole story.
We're falling
No,
short. They've been told to teach it, but they've not been given the guidance as to how.
Yeah, there needs to be a consensus of opinion amongst experts how to do this. And right now, everyone's teaching their own way, and it's not good.
Is this one of those things that just like with stalls or something like that, that you can take a student up and put them at a safe altitude and prove it to them themselves without having to risk being at an airport, low altitude and things like that?
Well, you can practice it at high altitude, but you do need an instructor who has previously been trained himself on how to perform the maneuver.
And we could talk all night about this topic. There's so much to discuss and so many factors. And the most important thing is every takeoff has its own fingerprint based on many factors that all need to be discussed. And if you're at one of these airports where there is nowhere to go, straight ahead is simply the most dangerous option, then you need to determine when and how you can do it. And there are a lot of factors, and that all, like you said, needs to be predetermined ahead of time, planned and practiced, and you need to have a plan before you ever pour the throttle on.
And then there is what we call the startle factor. This is pretty interesting. You can be so prepared for something that when it actually happens, you're startled. And there's some great stories about that. For example, Brian and I are going to do a little skit. There was a New York stage actor who is
you gotta
not
keep a straight face when you.
First of all, is there any statute of limitations that you're aware of on with the FAA? Because we're going to be talking about some stuff that could put us in jeopardy.
We make all of our guests sign an NDA that they absolutely will not contact the FAA based on anything you say. Don't worry about it. You can it's just us. No one's listening.
Okay, here we go. A New York stage actor had not had a part for a very long time. He was so discouraged that he considered getting out of show business. Now, one day he got a call from his agent who said, "I've got a part for you. It's in a stage play in LA. It's a small part, but it's pivotal to the plot. It's an historical period play, and there will be a lot of important people there. This could turn your career around," he said to the actor. "I've got a limo coming to pick you up. There will be a copy of the script and airline tickets in the limo." The actor gets in the limo and reads the script, and he sees that he has only one line.
"Hark, is that a cannon I hear?"
On the airline, all the way across the country, the actor tries to think of the best way to deliver that line.
"Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear?"
Over and over, he repeats the line.
"Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear?"
The actor gets to LA, another limo picks him up and whisks him off to the theater. They put him in his costume and he waits off stage for his cue. Finally, he gets the cue and he steps out onto the stage and hears boom.
What the hell was that?
And that is the startle factor. The surprise of something happening, no matter how well prepared you think you are prepared for it.
Yeah, like many people are trained to do stalls, push, lower the angle of attack. Yet when they're startled, most of the time they pull. And that's the startle factor.
Well, bravo, guys.
And now you know why we are not actors.
Think about Brian. Brian, think about.
I've always wanted you to sign a book, but I mean, really, on that one, I want the playbill. There's no question about it.
We'll send you tickets for the rerun.
It's memorialized now, isn't it? You're recording this.
And I will say that was the first time that we have had a live performance of that caliber on SocialFlight Live. So thank you. I do appreciate that very much.
No curtain call. Oh well.
You're welcome.
You should consider maybe taking on a tour show that has to do with mixing the the drama of that with the lessons of flying.
Well, I tell you, we can't do it again because from what I understand, you have so many viewers, that there's no one left to talk to.
Everybody's seen it now.
Yeah, this is
The first
it.
time we delivered that, we couldn't keep a straight face because we knew what was going to happen at the end, and we were just cracking up
We
the whole
could do it in German or French.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would encourage people if they can, certainly if they can get to AirVenture to go and see or talk about it, but also to look more into it. The AOPA, I think the AOPA stuff was very good, but they did reference that you had some interesting different techniques. What do you think was the difference or some of the nuances that could be addressed beyond what's out there? In what aircraft can make the turns and what can't, because they basically made it sound like a few low and slow aircraft can do it, and higher performance stuff kind of no chance.
It really depends on the length of the runway and the wind. What you have to know is you have to be at a certain height relative to the altitude required to turn around prior to passing the end of the runway. And if you are at the proper height, and this is something you've predetermined in flight testing your own airplane, then you can do it in any airplane if the conditions are right. And you'll know the conditions are right if you're high enough when you cross the end of the runway. Now, we can go into all of these procedures and techniques now, but it would take a long time. I don't want people to think, aha, I know what to do. There is a wonderful video that Brian created. It gives all those details. I highly recommend it, but I don't think we could go into it here. It would just take too much time.
We don't have to do that.
It's on my...
And I will say, one of the things from a long time ago, Barry, you have a video out there that I absolutely love to this day. It's probably the only reason I still have a VCR somewhere in my house, is that one in the Cessna where you're flying it only using the doors and the trim and power. Like that's knowing your airplane.
Yeah, it's landing and taking off without using any of the flight controls. It takes a lot of practice. But
He made me do that when he was teaching me.
You didn't do that in one shot?
Yeah.
He made me do that when he was teaching me how to fly. I had to do that.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you'd be amazed if you're in a Cessna 172 and you just crack open the doors, you push one door, push the other, the airplane just turns beautifully right or left. Yeah. You don't need a rudder or ailerons or anything like that. And then power and pitch trim will get you your attitude.
The trick is to plan ahead and make small, tiny little inputs and have a long final approach.
But don't try it without an instructor in the right seat.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things, I'm very curious about both of your thoughts on this. One of the things that seems to be missing and not emphasized a lot today is something you touched on, which is test flying your own plane, getting to know your own plane, like literally, oh, this is what it's like at gross at these temperatures to climb out of a safe runway. This is the altitudes that I get. This is the climb rates I get. This is the distances I can use. Most people I've talked to, even ones that own an airplane, haven't actually gone and tested it themselves.
No, that's true. It's true. And there's a lot to it. A lot to it.
And I'm sure you're going to do that in that mini scale model behind you, aren't you?
Yeah, that'll be incrementally that. But thank you very much for calling the Mustang a mini scale model.
That's what I meant was the Mustang. Is it it's not a full size Mustang, is it?
Yeah, 3/4 scale. Yep.
3/4 scale. That's what I meant.
Hey, so one of the things that I think we should talk about is both of you have been in the industry for a long time, and there's been a lot of changes that have obviously occurred during that time. What have you seen as maybe each of you like the most significant change during your tenure?
I think when I first started, well, Dad's seen a lot of changes. The 3-man crew is a big part of it, right? I mean, you had a navigator actually. The third guy did the navigating for you, the navigation part.
Well, there were at one time 5. There was the navigator, the radio operator,
Oh my
the
gosh.
flight engineer, the co-pilot, and then the captain, of course, Herr Commandant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
Not,
we really liked having a 3-man crew, which was typical when I got hired. The main reason for that being that if you flatulated in the cockpit, no one knows who did it.
you can remain anonymous. Exactly.
If you're in a 2-man cockpit and you do that, the other guy knows.
When I went from the 727 captain to the MD-80 captain, I realized I had to stop doing that in the cockpit because immediately the other guy knew, or gal, knew who it was. But with a 3-man crew, you can do that, and there's doubt. Everybody looks around, and you're just like,
Who did that?
Another big change was these headsets. When I started, these were the headsets they had in the airplane.
Really?
Yeah, this was what,
Skull
30
crushers, we called them.
32 years ago. Now you could order your own little earpiece, which is what everybody did. But this is what the headset looked like, and the microphone, which they was like this.
Oh my God! And
These
that's
things
what
look like they belong in the Smithsonian, and they'd screw this little lanyard to it so that you could hook it on the window handle in the cockpit, or a hook that was made for hanging up the microphone. And it was a television.
that was when you were flying, Brian. When you
Yeah,
started.
when I started as a flight engineer, this is what was there, and this was the microphone. This was the headset.
So what were some of the last aircraft still in common service that had 3-man crews that you didn't have to worry about what you ordered for lunch, guys?
And no more 3-man crews.
Well, there's
What-
international. We have
What,
a really
what was the last ones before they went away? What aircraft were doing that?
727.
10-11, 747, the older 747s.
And the 727. Yeah.
Yeah, but the biggest change, Brian, is the one you have to put up with.
The
Which
biggest.
is- Yeah.
Well, you mean what we call where we sit?
No,
that's
no,
the new news.
That's
That's
that. Or
the
when
new
you
information,
go
right?
to the restroom.
Oh, I have to. Yeah, that's a huge change that's happened over the course of my career. That I have to get permission from the flight attendants to go back and use the restroom, and we have to get one of them up there to babysit the other pilot while one goes to the restroom. Can't just. We used to just walk out and go to the restroom. Now you can't do that.
Or
I didn't
even
know,
walk
I didn't know one attendant has to go into the cockpit. Did I
Yes.
say that? But
This
You-
is all
you-
a result of 9/11. We used to walk through the cockpit, make what was called a cabin tour.
You'd walk to the cabin. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd go back, hit on the good-looking people, talk to them, I mean, socialize with the passengers.
We'd make bets before we left as to how many passengers would say, "Who's flying the airplane?"
And invariably, when I hear that, I would just go, "Oh," scurry back. Oh shoot, I didn't think about that.
Speaking of the navigator used to tell the captain what heading to maintain flying across the ocean. And there's this great story about this guy. He was one of our navigators. He handed the captain a slip of paper, as he normally would, flying across the ocean. And it said, "Turn right 1 degree." And the captain looks at the piece of paper. He says, "Oh, come on, give me a break. I can't fly this airplane within 1 degree." And he wads up the paper, throws it on the floor. He says, "When you have a significant heading change, then give it to me." About 5 minutes later, the navigator handed him a piece of paper. Says, "Turn right 10 degrees. Captain said, "That's great. That's more like it." And then the navigator instantly told him to turn left 9 degrees.
I could probably do that easier, right? 10, left 9. Yeah. Everything's digital now. You can select a heading to the degree now, but before it was a heading bug and you kind of rough it, and the width of the line maybe was 1 degree. Now ATC can ask you, "What's your heading?" "Oh, it's 246.325 degrees."
I remember back in the mid 90s when the first like handheld GPSs were coming out, and I was flying over to Europe, and I'm in the back, and I brought it with me, put the little suction cup, antenna on the window, and I was surprised, like, oh, it picked up satellites. I was able to get this, and that's exactly what happened. The captain came back, or first officer came back, was walking down the aisle, taking a break, looking at people, talking to people, whatever they were doing, saw that I was doing this, and said, "Oh, let me see that." He goes, you know where we are more than we know where we are.
Yeah. And I remember when those came out and walking back through the cabin and seeing people have those, usually pilots, And I look at that and I go, wow, that's just amazing. Crossing, going down from New York down to San Juan, Puerto Rico or something like that. And we're out over the water and hoping that another island shows up because we're using this Omega or we're using some cross bearings off of an ADF. And I go back there and the passenger's looking, it's got a moving map. And I'm like, that's just insane. The passengers did know more than we did at that point. And we, I noticed, Dad, you said the word cockpit a few times. That's something in your day that was okay.
I was the first one guilty. So how do you guys feel about the fact that I believe that's about to be outlawed?
Yeah, there's an advisory panel for the FAA that says they no longer can use the word cockpit. They want to change it to flight deck. I just can't imagine having a flight deck in the Cessna 150, but
yeah,
that's what they want to do.
The flight deck. Yeah, and I guess it's all about a gender thing. I don't understand what the word cockpit has to do with gender or what they're pulling out of there. But I mean, what
are they going to do about a cocktail?
Yeah, or what are they going to call it when you make a gun ready to shoot?
Or what about a male rooster? What are you going to call that little guy?
Or an NBC's logo? How about that? The proud as a what?
You can't say that. You can't say that anymore.
You can't say peacock anymore because that's a gender.
What about the petcock on your fuel tank?
No, it's a valve now, I guess. You got to call it a valve. How about in badminton? What is it you hit back and forth in badminton? It's that shuttle.
Shuttlecock.
The shuttle flight deck?
It's all a cockeyed, cockamamie thing that I don't know where we're headed with this stuff.
My kids used to have a cockatiel. I don't know what you'd do with that. You'd call that some other kind of bird. This whole thing is poppycock.
Well, I think a lot of this changing of terms, cancellation, I guess, comes from the fact that a lot of people don't understand where the term cockpit came from. It's not a gender thing at all. It comes from the nautical term. Way back in the early sailing days, the guy who steered the ship was called a coxswain. And he had a place where he would steer the vessel, and it was called a coxswain's pit. Then they abbreviated coxswain to coxswain, and it became the coxswain's pit. And that's where cockpit came from. It has nothing whatever to do with gender. So I think they're going a little nuts trying to change all these things. It'll always be a cockpit to me. I don't care who's in it.
What about the joystick?
Oh, a lot of people think joystick is a dirty thing too. It's not.
Because there's one in the cockpit.
The joystick, it was invented by a guy named Harold Joyce, and the control stick was called a Joyce stick. But you can't say Joyce stick without starting to slobber. So it became foreshortened. It's joystick. But it's named after Harold Joyce, who invented the control stick.
Wow. I think it's offensive.
Yeah, there's a couple other things that are kind of fun. Have you ever heard the expression socked in? The field is socked in.
When it's 0-0.
Yeah, it's kind of fun how that originated. It originated in France. Whenever the field was closed because of foul weather, they would take down the sock and they'd bring it in, and the sock would be in. Sock in means the field is closed. That's where the term socked in came from.
I never knew that. That's really, really interesting, actually. Field socked in, the windsock's gone. I like that.
I love the term hangar. You know where hangar came from? Why do we call that thing a hangar?
Because you hang out there?
Hangar is a French word, hangar. And it means outhouse or shed. So you really keep your airplane in an outhouse.
Maybe we should change it to that.
Which gender?
I don't know. Don't give me. Well, don't make me the left turning tendency of training device out. Sorry.
So we promised people a few tips and some different things before we get back into a couple more questions about history and things between you guys.
What about this? They got to rename this. I'm sorry. Sorry.
They're going to have to.
I don't want to know the other book you're about to pull out that goes with that. Let's just leave it at where it is.
Okay.
So Brian, you do a lot kind of hands-on educating these days. We talked about the 180-degree turn. What are some of the other big topics that come up, and maybe some, the types of things people should be thinking about, especially as they make their way to AirVenture this year and have to deal with all the challenges of getting there?
Well, it seems like the big topic du jour is the controlled flight into terrain, and how do we prevent loss of control. The startle factor, believe it or not, is a big factor in that, and so stall recovery and then spins. And I'm getting into some debatable topics on what we should do regarding teaching flight instructors how to teach spins properly, because how many stall spin accidents do you hear about with people either trying to stretch a glide to the airport, a cross-controlled overshoot to the final? So I think stall spin recovery and avoidance are something that we really need to focus on, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of good stuff. I think Rich Stoll is probably going to have something at Oshkosh on that. I'm working on a couple of things to talk about with some aerobatic instructors on that same topic regarding spin training. Another thing I just recorded with NAFI, one of our briefing room conversations was about in multi-engine aircraft teaching doing VMC demos, flying with asymmetric thrust down to where you're the speed of minimum control in a multi-engine airplane. It seems like a lot of the light twin training is going by the wayside with all the really fancy turboprops that are coming out these days. But that's another big topic that I think all the twin accidents that we're seeing, it's just really, really preventable. So I think that's a topic I'd like to talk about some more as well. And when we get to at AirVenture, I'll be doing a talk on being pilot in command, how to be a good PIC. I'm going to have to bring someone in to talk about that, but give me advice.
I think a lot of stick and rudder stuff is surprisingly lacking in some of the newer pilots that I've spoken to. I mentioned earlier we were on a thread a little bit about the importance of flight testing the plane you're flying, really understanding it, but that also goes into the aspects of knowing how to slip it, what the difference is between slipping and skidding and things like that. What are your thoughts on how that should fit into flight training and what people should be thinking about?
Well, I think everybody should be comfortable slipping an airplane, and there are instructors out there who are uncomfortable with slips, and you can clearly tell that. And of course, I think it should really be emphasized the difference between a slip and a skid and why one is much more dangerous than the other. I mean, we could do a whole conversation on that, but the hands-on stick and rudder skills are going away. Especially when you get these automated airplanes coming out with so much integrated stuff. You're more of a systems operator, like in the advanced Cirrus. It's beautiful, it's wonderful what they do, but I'd like to really encourage pilots to take a hand-flown flight every now and then and just do everything by hand and get the feel for this thing and operate a little bit closer to the edges and see what it does and what it can do. But
let's give people a nugget of your information. I know we're alluding to a lot of it, but I do want to give a piece of the detail. So tell me, for example, about the skids versus slips and intentional stuff, so people can take a sample of what you teach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Dad could probably contribute to this as well, but a slip is what we normally do, a side slip and a forward slip. It has its purpose for crosswind landings, for getting down when you need to, for maybe doing a power off approach if you lose an engine. The skid, I can't think, skid is more of an accidental thing. Dad, can you think of any positive time that you would do a skid? A skid is when the tail of the airplane is not following the rest of the airplane around. It's when you're forcing the turn, like in a car, when you make a turn with a car and everybody goes scooting toward the outside, that's a skid. So the ball goes to the outside of the turn, just like your kids do when you make a sharp turn and they're all leaning on each other. Where a slip,
skid is a great prelude to a spin, which makes it much more, something you have to be much more careful about. It's very difficult to induce a spin from a slip, almost impossible. In fact, it's almost counter to a spin. So there's no reason to fear a slip. It's a little uncomfortable, but if there are times when you really have to be able to do it and do it properly.
And a slip is more cross control, right, as opposed to just putting in extra rudder the same direction as you're doing. Is that correct?
Well, putting the rudder in the same direction results in the skid, not the slip.
Right.
Too much rudder is a skid. Not enough rudder or opposite rudder is a slip.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of aircraft out there that's the magic to getting them to land well. Is a good slip.
That's right. And let's say that you have to make a landing in an airplane where the flaps are inoperative. It's sometimes very difficult to get down, and slipping is perhaps the only way you're going to get down safely.
Yeah, especially in the case of an engine out, you make your turn back and realize, oh, I've got a tailwind. I probably shouldn't have done this. I'm going to overshoot the airport. If it full flaps, you got no engine, you start slipping is really all you've got left to try to get that airplane down.
Yeah.
And slow. You can also use a slip to slow down.
Yes.
You know, I remember years ago, I flew I owned and flew a Grumman Traveler, and I remember I had flown it for quite a while before I went to a convention and ended up flying with an instructor that was just absolutely an expert in the plane. And I was always scared to get it that slow and then put it into a slip to get down. And I remember he brought it up what I thought was way too high over the airport to get down and make the runway, and just showed me, you just slow it down, jam your foot down, crank it. I mean, it's amazing when you have the right person to teach you what they can show you that your plane can do.
Yeah, but Jeff, you're getting way too serious. You're supposed to be asking us questions according to the script that we provided you. and you're supposed to ask a question. You should be asking a question at this point.
So this.
All right, if both of you guys are flying, who is pilot in command?
If you're,
if both of you guys are flying, who is pilot in command?
Brian, tell him.
No, we're not going to answer that until after the flight. Depends on what happened during the flight. It will determine who's piloting command.
Yeah, it's like on the airline. If the landing is bad, we know it wasn't the captain who made it.
Right.
Nice. I do have a picture that you sent me. So let me put this up.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
that's kind of neat.
That was
What's the story behind this?
Yeah, that was an envelope that Dad gave me on my first Trans-Pacific flight as pilot in command. And actually, if you look at the nav display there, you can see we're almost to the equal time point, halfway between Los Angeles and Hawaii. Actually, San Francisco and Hawaii. But anyway, we're halfway to Hawaii. And he gave me this envelope, says, do not open until passing the point of no return on your first flight to Hawaii, Dad. So I open it up, and among other various fun things that are in there, I've got a copy of the High and the Mighty. So if anybody's seen that movie and you understand why halfway across the Pacific is significant at that point, some other unmentionable things that he had in there, some candy, some whatever. But then he had this device that he put in there.
And you still have yet to learn to use it. This,
no,
I will tell you, is a nose flute.
I can't. I've tried. I can't do it.
And with the nose flute, when I flew trips to Hawaii, I used to play the High and the Mighty when passing the point of no return on night flights. And people hearing this would know it was me. And they'd also think, because I'm playing the High and the Mighty, that, you know, it's John Wayne. And someone would say on the mic, how's the Duke doing? And stuff like that. We had great fun when passing the point of no return. And if you'd like,
play it for us, would you?
I'll play you a rendition of the High and the Mighty. I'm a little out of practice, but this is what I played over the radio on VHF frequency as we were heading across the ocean.
Your ratings are about to drop, Jeff.
I'm watching the attendance. Go.
All right. Don't crack me up, Brian. Don't crack me. Can you shut him off just for a minute? I don't play it as well.
I can't do it. Then I get.
Okay.
I used to play this really well.
Get boogers all over it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome
That's
to
the end of that. No more.
Let's transition to another picture.
No, you're supposed to ask us if we've ever. Oh, that one. Yeah.
Oh wait, hold on. What about? No, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was off script.
Whose show is it anyway? Whose line is it? Off script. This is
Your
scripted.
turn, Brian.
When did this show get scripted, guys? Okay, here you
This
go.
was really neat. Okay, so this is what happens when you grow up with your little feet walking in someone's huge footsteps like my old man's, that everywhere you go, everybody, oh, are you related? Well, now sometimes they say Adam Schiff, and it's a little bit different, but so are you related to Barry Schiff? So here I am cruising along transcontinental flight, and I get it's a printer message that comes across our crew communication computer, and it comes up on the printer in the cockpit. So I get this message from our dispatch that says this: thanks, always wanted to ask, because he sees my name all the time. Captains and dispatchers work closely together for the safety of every flight. And he sends this message to me. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I've had that happen actually a couple times. It's interesting that when you follow in the footsteps of someone really well known in aviation, you're constantly getting barraged by things like this. But I don't consider it a barrage. I feel honored, but I will say he's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, now I'm getting questions. Do I know Brian Schiff?
Yeah, well, and I wanted to say, Barry, that I really do appreciate, the fact, I mean, I had you on the show so that Brian would come on, and I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, he'll come on any show. He's a ham.
Yeah, anything for attention.
One of the things that you guys have talked to me about in the past has been emergencies and some of your experiences with those. So let's talk about that for a minute.
I can tell you the worst emergency I ever had. I was holding over Zanesville, Ohio, in a very thick cloud deck, waiting for clearance to make an approach. And they told me it was going to be about an hour before I would be able to get in. I had plenty of fuel, but I also had a full bladder. And conditions were getting very difficult. And I finally told the controller, I said, look, I need to get down in a hurry. He said, why? I said, what's the hurry? And I said, I need to go potty really, really badly. He says, is it really that serious? I said, yes, it is. And he gave me a heading, a vector, a descent, and I was on the ground in 10 minutes.
I'm going to use that.
It works great.
So is potty like a phrase like fuel critical?
It's liquid critical.
I'm at minimum bladder.
Yeah.
Declaring min bladder.
Do you know why old men, by the way, do you know why old men are safer than young pilots? It's because their bladder capacity is way less than their fuel capacity.
You'll never run out of gas.
Yeah. By the way, I have to show you something. This is really quite neat. On long flights,
Ever since his emergency.
little airplanes, I used to ferry little airplanes. And I used to wear something called a Texas catheter. And a Texas catheter is something that enables you to go tinkle anytime you want to without any, just do it. And Texas catheter is this. You wear this.
What are you holding up?
As a man would wear this. You put it on. I think you can tell what it is. It's just the thing you slip on. And,
Okay.
And then it leads to this bag, which you have strapped to your calf.
This is an hour-long show. I bet he's got one on now.
I do. And I can just go whenever I want to. In fact, when I give long speeches, I wear one of these, and I can go tinkle at any time during the seminar or the speech. It's absolutely wonderful.
That would explain some of your facial expressions.
But they don't have these for women, or maybe they do, but it's called a Texas catheter. You can buy them online, just a couple bucks, and they're wonderful for being able to go tinkle without anybody knowing about it. And you do it with a smile on your face because nobody knows.
Right.
Brian, any
So
emergency?
speaking of emergency,
Texas catheters for you?
Nope, not that. I just wear diapers. My first emergency was flying on a family vacation trip. Actually, it was Dad and I were both flying. It was in a Cessna 414. No, we didn't own it. We borrowed it from a very good friend. And we were on a family vacation coming back to Southern California from Zion National Park, that area, one of the national parks. It doesn't matter. We're coming back. Bryce Canyon. Yeah. So we're coming back home, and there are some thunderstorms building up ahead of us, and the only way to get around them, we asked to go and deviate. We're VFR, getting flight following, and we're going around these buildups over the desert, which is not uncommon this time of year. And so there was a restricted airspace over there. I forget, 2504. It doesn't matter which one, but there's restricted airspace we're headed towards. And they said, hey, you're headed toward restricted airspace. What are you going to do? And I just watched this whole thing play out. I'm a student pilot or private pilot. I don't remember where I was at that point, but definitely a fledgling pilot learning. And he says, well, we're not going right. There's clouds over there and buildups that we're not going to fly, and we need to go around them. They said, well, you're headed toward restricted airspace. So can you accept an IFR clearance into the clouds? Are you IFR equipped? And he said, I'm IFR equipped, but I'm not taking an IFR clearance to go into those clouds. Those are buildups, they're dangerous, they're thunderstorms. And at that point, he just said, I'm gonna go ahead and declare an emergency, squawk 7700, and we're gonna plow through this restricted airspace. And it was just a matter of fact, and they said, okay, we'll follow you along here and do what you need to do. And it was really no big deal. We flew through the restricted airspace. I want to say something intercepted or flew alongside of us, but I don't remember. We landed in Santa Monica, and he did get a phone number. That was the worst of it. So he had a call, and after landing, I think they apologized to you about if they'd have just told you to go up another 1,000 or 2,000 feet, you would have been on top of the hot restricted airspace. But they didn't offer that. They didn't tell us that. But what I learned from that is, as a pilot in command, you do what you have to do. Don't accept this. It's not they don't call it controller in command. It's pilot in command. And when you're approaching weather you don't like, or you don't fly through it. If the choice is go through the restricted airspace or fly through nasty weather, thunderstorm that you're not capable of flying through, or it's just dangerous to fly through, the airplane doesn't know it's in restricted airspace. You're going to fly it just fine. Stay in the clear, declare an emergency, and go through that. Well, having watched him do that, I learned that's all I got to do when I need something I'm not getting from air traffic control, or I need to do something that's against the rules. I declare an emergency and go. But so many pilots are hesitant to declare an emergency because they fear the repercussions, or for whatever reason don't do it.
I was very fortunate during my 34 years with TWA. I never had anything that I would regard as a really threatening emergency. I was very fortunate. It's luck of the draw. Brian has had at least one that scares the hell out of me just listening to him.
Yeah, well, you know why? Because when you flew the airplanes I was flying, they were new. The Boeing 7027 just off the assembly line, and I get it 30 years later.
That's when I had hair.
Yeah, I had an emergency in an airliner that involved smoke, and it was an electrical motor down below. The fan motor actually was burning up. We didn't know it at the time. All we knew is we smelled a very acrid, burning odor. It smelled electric, but it was coming through the air conditioning, so we couldn't tell if it's air conditioning or electric, but it smelled very putrid, like electrical odor, electric burning. And so I immediately declared an emergency, and I told the co-pilot, I said, you rush through the checklist, I'm going to rush to the airport, declaring an emergency. But what was really hair-raising about this was that at the time we were deviating in the clouds, we were around embedded thunderstorms. So we were really relying on our radar at the time. And to understand what we're going through in this procedure to shut off all the electrical, to put out the electrical fire, I was about to lose my radar. And so that was telling me where all the weather is. Now, luckily, this was going into Indianapolis, and I was talking to Indianapolis approach control, and they had some radar, limited back then. It's better now, but they can help you. Approach control can. I believe center control, you maybe need to have a controller on here to confirm this, but I believe center has the NextRad, which is outdated weather, minutes old, like you have on your devices. But the approach controllers have live radar, active radar. And he was helping me, but I took a look at that radar and told the co-pilot, wait a minute, don't shut everything off yet. And I kind of looked at the radar screen, got a mental image, and I kind of thought, I'm dead reckoning, a minute this way, and then 45 degrees left for another few minutes. That should get us clear. Okay, go, shut it all off. And he starts shutting everything down. And it was a race to the runway. We landed, with oxygen mask and smoke goggles on. And what they don't train you for are other things like the passengers and the flight attendants panicking through this whole thing. So I made a PA every couple minutes to tell, hey, we got an issue, we're working it, we'll be on the ground shortly, everything's gonna be fine. Of course, I had to sound like I wasn't scared poopless, so I had to change that voice right away. I was a little bit frightened, but I would say I don't think I was scared until after we landed and I realized, oh my gosh, that was scary. But we did what we were trained to do. One more thing they didn't train us for is when you're wearing 100% oxygen and you're stressed out, your throat gets very dry, very dry. Stress alone will do it, but then 100% oxygen on top of that will really dry it out. And I couldn't talk, couldn't speak. My throat was so dry. And I remember specifically thinking about biting into a lemon to try to get my mouth to water a little bit. And it worked. From this day on, I've always carried little quench gum with me that runners carry. They're very bitter gum. It's to chew in an emergency.
Isn't that fascinating? Wow, that sounds like you did one heck of a job in a tough situation.
That's the short version of it. And I will say that after we landed, we evacuated right there on the runway. The fire department came out and said, you know, another 5 minutes in the air and this airplane would have been done. And that was very much an eye-opener for me, that any kind of fire, I mean, there are very few times to hurry in an airplane. In fact, I always teach there's two speeds, slow or screw up. But when you're on fire, that's one of the times you kind of need to hurry. And we got down as quickly as we could, put it on the ground, stopped the airplane, and evacuated right there on the runway. And it was, then after that, I got a little bit of post-traumatic stress and realized how scary that actually was.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, better you than me.
Right.
You know, going back to where you started with the story, I think that's a really, really important point to punch home of deviating from approach control as well. And I mean, I've personally experienced more than once where, for one reason, whether it's unintentional, of course, and just not knowing, or radar sectors changing and they just need you to do something to stay in their sector, a lot of times you'll get steered towards something that you don't feel is safe, and you have to override them. That's a very difficult impulse.
You know, a pilot has to do whatever he has to do to maintain the safety of his flight. And I got a really good lesson when I was a new co-pilot with TWA. I was flying with a guy named Charlie Black Dog Davis, and we were flying across the country, across Thunderstorm Alley and Tornado Alley, and it was really.
Why don't we get nicknames anymore in this day and age?
I was going to say, before you even go into this, we can tell this was back in the days of the talkies when people had middle names like Black Dog.
Black Dog Davis was a great World War II pilot. He was my hero. Anyway, and here's why. We're flying along, and he says, call the center, tell him we need 30-degree right turn at count, thunderstorms ahead. And the controller came back and said, sorry, unable to approve that. We've got traffic off to your right. So Charlie says, tell me you want to go left. So I said, okay, requesting a 30-degree turn to the left because of these thunderstorms. Controller said the same thing. He said, we got traffic out there. I can't give you that. Charlie says, I'll talk to him. He picked up the mic and he had this Arkansas drawl. He says, Santa, this is TWA 36. Is we are turning 30 degrees left. The problem is yours.
And that's what you have to do.
We're not going to fly into those thunderstorms.
That's
what you have to do.
That's the big thing. So why don't we debunk for a minute or explain to people what are the consequences? So if you have people understand whether it's declared an emergency or not, what are the consequences for saying unable and doing whatever you need to do or want to do in the cockpit for a good reason?
The regulations give you the authority to violate any regulation at all if it's necessary for the safety of your flight.
There is one huge consequence, and I'm going to emphasize this. You get to live. That's the consequence, and you have to take responsibility for it. The controller can't fly the airplane for you. The controller doesn't know what's happening with the airplane, only you do. The pilot has to take control of his airplane. There was a time going into Dallas, Fort Worth, and this is another emergency that I declared. We were on the RNAV arrivals when they were brand new arrivals, and they were testing them to get everybody far apart so that they could test these RNAV arrivals. But then when they get the success rate they wanted, they would now be able to get everybody nice and close. Well, they turned the runways around, and I was approaching a waypoint that required a right turn instead of a left, and I was set up for a left turn because they were landing to the north, and now they switched the runway to the south, and so it was going to require a right turn. Well, this was in the MD-80, and the flight management system is a little bit slow in that airplane, and so as soon as we're reprogramming it, our purple line goes away. And so I said, ATC, we're going to need a heading while we reprogram this. And he said, unable, I need you to stay on the arrival. Well, I'm about a mile from a fix that requires a turn one way or another, and I don't have it loaded yet. And he wasn't listening. He was kind of trigger happy because he wanted everybody to stay on the arrival because they had a goal of this arrival rate so that they could get approval. And I finally just said, look, I'm declaring an emergency, requesting a heading. And is this a true dire consequence emergency? No, not so much in that lives are at stake, but there are that spacing is going to be compromised. There could be a loss of separation, and I can't comply with his clearance. So this is a situation where I could not comply with the clearance, and he wasn't listening to my predicament, and I didn't have time to get into details. So I just said, declaring an emergency, request a heading. And he says, you're declaring an emergency? I said, affirmative, I need a heading. I don't have nav right now. He says, okay, fly this heading, blah, 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 blah. And as soon as we got our program, we got our purple line back. I said, all right, I'm undeclaring the emergency. I'm able to do whatever you need at this point. And he cleared me direct to a fix, and we continued the arrival. Not one consequence, not one phone call, not one anything after that. But what happened is I didn't have to violate a regulation. I didn't cause a loss of separation. I did what I had to do because of what I had going on.
Yeah, I think it's really important for pilots to understand that if they declare an emergency for the purpose of maintaining their safety of flight, there are no consequences. The FAA is not going to require you to file a report or write a letter or anything like that. There's nothing you have to do. If they ask for an explanation, that could be the extent of it, a phone call. But you do what you have to do to fly the airplane safely. Nothing else really matters.
Right.
And what are one thing that does come up, of course, as a question with that is, what are your thoughts on using the NASA system, NASA reporting system, also to kind of cover your butt a little bit with things?
Brian files that report prior to every takeoff.
Well, you declare an emergency before every takeoff. I think it's a great program, what they've done to establish where the problems are. If you get all kinds of people filing these NASA reports about this same issue, then maybe the issue is not with the pilots. It might be something systematic, and they can, systemic or whatever, they can fix that. But if you think you've accidentally messed up, and as soon as you find out about it, you file a NASA form. I'm all for it. There's no reason, there's no harm, no foul, unless you did something willful. If you broke a rule on purpose, or you did something dangerous or sketchy on purpose, that's not the time to file it. They're not going to allow it into the system. So as long as you're following the rules, doing your best, something accidental happens, as soon as you're made aware that you busted an altitude, broke a rule, or did something wrong, you should file one of those.
Yeah. Seems like it covers you no matter what.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't want to run out of time without getting to some of the other things that I know that we've chatted on before. One thing is, you sent me another picture here, and I want to make sure I get this on here, because
make sure you know.
There's got to be a story behind this.
Not mine.
Well, hey, I'm rather proud of that. It's my first landing in a Connie back in 1964. I applied brakes a little too aggressively and blew a tire.
See, there's a change. Today we have wonderful anti-skid systems.
Yeah, they didn't have them on the Connie.
Yeah, they say if the airplane's reusable, but that doesn't apply to the tires then, I guess.
No, the tire was definitely not reusable. You may not see it really well. I don't know if you can, but it's a blown tire. And if you look really carefully, and you probably can't see it, there's a wear mark right around where the tire blew.
Well, like you said, as long as the plane itself is, it's fine at the end of it, it was a good landing. Like no matter what. And from the maintenance side, I can say we define the aircraft as the data plate. So as long as the data plate's good after landing, I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, the airplane's reusable, but not necessarily immediately reusable, but eventually reusable.
It will be attached to something.
By the way, I guess, the Air Force is going to have to change one of the expressions it has. When I got a semi checkout in a U2, which was really pretty fascinating. And they attach a thing to you so that if at 75,000 feet you need to urinate, you can do it. It's no problem at all. It's the same kind of a thing as I showed you, like a Texas catheter, but it's a part of the pressure suit. One thing that you cannot do in these pressure suits is the other thing. Just call it number 2, I guess. And after you land and you taxi up to the hangar, these guys, ground crewmen, come running up to the cockpit, and the first thing they want to know is, did you do it? Because then they got quite a mess to clean up. And and you'd think that people could avoid it. In some cases, on these guys go on 12, 15-hour flights, and they come back, and there are a number of what are designated as strato poopers.
That sounds like a really crappy.
There's a strange theme to the show going on. I just have to say, it's going to be time for the vacation of July.
Speaking of vacation, it was like every time we went on vacation, it was like being on vacation really with Chevy Chase with this one.
I can only imagine your family.
Together. You're supposed to ask me about NOTAMs that I've had.
I am. You did ask me to ask you about NOTAMs. Yes, sir. Tell me about NOTAMs.
Well, ask the question.
Have you received any strange NOTAMs?
Funny thing you should ask. I received 2 really funny NOTAMs during my career. The first one was in Africa. I was flying to a strip out in the Svelte, in the boonies, and the NOTAM read, "Caution, breaking nil account worms." And I thought, oh boy, that's going to be a fun place to step out of the airplane.
We get that all the time in the Midwest.
And it was, and in New Zealand, I got one that was similar. It says, "Breaking action nil, account sheep." You got to think about that one a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. How about one last thing? Jets? What was the first jet you flew?
First jet I flew?
Or Brian, what was the first jet you flew?
First jet I ever flew. Funny you should ask that. It was a Lockheed 1011 when I was 18 years old. And that was a very fortunate situation. What's the last statute?
We have to, are there any statute? There are statutes of limitations, right?
None I'm aware of.
Can you tell
This was what year, Brian?
1952. Can you tell if there's any FAA on board?
If there's anyone who has not laughed during the show, that would be the FAA.
Yeah,
I was in college. This was in 1986, 87, something like that. And
this may or may not be true. How's that?
This may or may not be true. I heard about this, that I did this. It may have been a dream. I may have dreamed this, that Dad had a ferry flight from San Francisco to Los Angeles. This was a dream. And I dreamt that he asked me along to come on this ferry flight and I could sit in the cockpit. And I thought, wow. And so I went along with him, sat in the cockpit. And just before we took the runway, he turned to the co-pilot and said, the co-pilot gets out of his seat. Dad looks at me and he points to the right seat and says, have a seat. And I'm like, holy crap. And so I sit down and now I not only get to ride in the cockpit, I get to sit up here and watch this magic happen. And so we turn onto the runway and he goes, all right, put your right hand on the yoke and grab a fistful of throttles and have some fun. And I'm like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. So here I'm this young college punk and I flew that thing. I hand flew it all the way to Los Angeles. And then my alarm clock went off and I had to get up and go to class.
Oh, guys, listen, I can appreciate. I am so grateful that you took time out of your evening to join us here on the show.
We're just getting started.
Like, I know it's like flown by, and I've done my best to fit in some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience and poke some of them at you guys. I'd love to have you back and pick a topic and do that again when we come back in the fall. We are getting ready to wrap things up for a month off and go to Oshkosh and do all this adventure flying. I guess I can imagine you guys have your own adventures planned.
Absolutely. I give you an A for effort to trying to make this educational, and then we do like to do that. my hat's off to you. But yeah, I'll be at Oshkosh. I'll be in the NAFI, National Association of Flight Instructors booth most of the time, between there and AOPA, and I'll be roaming the grounds as well. I look forward to seeing you out there and 100,000 of my best friends.
Absolutely. So everybody, if you're going to be at the show, get over to the NAFI tent booth, see Brian, grab some of Barry's books, get him to sign them, buy those online. This stuff, it just never ends. Barry, thank you so much for joining us this evening as well.
It was a joy for both of us. It really was. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jeff.
Yeah, and we'll be selling this book, which is really the best thing on the market. It's hot. Get them while they last, but we'll have some signed books out there at Oshkosh too.
I need that. That's the book I need signed because I'm the one that needs to read that.
You're doing a great job, Jeff. I think what you're doing is awesome.
I agree.
Well, thank you both. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We will be off. Oh, and there you go with the great Just Plain Crazy hat. We will be off for the month of July, out there flying, leaving on Friday for an adventure, heading out to Yellowstone National Park in the Bonanza. Going to make a video about that, and then we'll be seeing everybody at AirVenture. And we will be back on August 3rd at 8 p.m. with Mike Wonkum of WCVB talking about weather at the big scale, learning all about things and weather tips for pilots. We'll get back into the swing of things in August. Until next time, thank you guys so much. Yes, Barry.
Do you know what a meteorologist is?
Please tell me.
It's a man who can look into a girl's eyes and tell weather.
I love it. So everyone, thank you all so much. Thank you at home for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. And as always, we look forward to having you join us back as we pick things back up in August. And until next time, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Barry. Thank you to everyone. And I wish you all blue skies. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.